Say the bracha. Baruch atah
Adonai
Elohim
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. All right. So starting at 39.
29.
Oh, sorry, 29. Thank you. Let's read through. Can we scroll down a little bit, Kim?
The chapter ends at 34. You may want to just go to
All
the
right,
end.
well, let's read 34, and we'll take it up from that point. Okay, who would like to read?
I'll read.
Okay, Remy, you're on.
Okay, 29, chapter 35, Numbers. Such shall be your law of procedure throughout the ages in all your settlements. If anyone kills a person, the manslayer may be executed only on the evidence of witnesses. The testimony of a single witness against a person shall not suffice for a sentence of death. You may not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of a capital crime. He must be put to death. Nor may you accept ransom in lieu of its plight on a city of refuge, enabling one to return to live on his land before the death of the priest. You shall not pollute the land in which you live, for blood pollutes the land, and the land can have no expiation for blood that is shed on it, except by the blood of him who shed it. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself abide, for I, the Lord, abide among the Israelite people.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, well, these few verses have a lot for us to talk about. Let's go back to the beginning of the section. Okay, there you go.
Excuse me.
Yes. Did somebody? I thought I heard somebody. All right. So, what do you make out of the out of verse 30? If anyone kills a person, the manslayer may be executed only on the evidence of witnesses. The testimony of a single witness against a person shall not suffice for a sentence of death. What do you make out of that? What point is the text making?
Well,
That the bar is set pretty high, really high, I would say, before, in other words, to give evidence that this actually was committed by this person, this killing, that even if a single person was a witness, it is not enough, that you need a higher bar than that. And, it occurs to me, does such a event actually occur other than, a mass riot or a mass protest when there are, more, there's more than.
Yeah. Well, let me ask a question from a little bit different angle. What is the problem with having a single witness? Why is
it's a he said, she said thing.
Sure. So perhaps the person who is the witness might have some personal animus or bias or some other consideration that might make their testimony unreliable, suspicious. So you need to have a second person to corroborate it.
Rabbi, there's also another point, I think. Sometimes the perspective you have can be distorted, just like they go back in football for instant replay from a number of different angles, you see different things. And so even though the witness may be conscientious and telling what he or she saw, maybe they simply are wrong based on the perspective they have.
That's a very good point to add to the argument. And as we have come to learn in recent decades, eyewitness testimony is often very unreliable.
Yeah.
That because of point of view and because of prejudice, all sorts of reasons why a witness may not mean to, but is misrepresenting the situation. They may mean to do it. They may be intentionally trying to get somebody in trouble, but even when they're not, their perspective can be skewed, and you can't find a lot of firm foundation. One of the reasons why DNA evidence has become so important in many different cases, because DNA doesn't lie. It's not a matter of personal perspective or bias or anything of the sort. DNA is an absolute in that regard. But let's go even further, because Stan's got us onto a good track. How would the situation be improved by having a second witness? Presumably, the second witness could be as prejudiced or as disadvantaged in their point of view as the first witness. How does it help? Remy?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Stan said, and then I'll go to your answer. And I always look at like a box, a small box. If I'm looking at that box from a different angle, what Stan, and another person will look at it, his vision or his perception on the way you look at will be different from mine. Yes. And also too, there has been a lot of studies on the reliability of memory, the way the brain function. And my husband is retired now, used to be a trial lawyer. So he always, especially during the times where cases were being tried. A lot of cases now, they are being mediated, but because the tort laws changed about 30 years ago. But anyway, the brain and memory is so unreliable. It's just amazing how, like Kim or Stan or Judy is saying, that biases will play a role. So 2 or 3 witnesses is so imperative in executing impartial justice.
I'm very pleased that you said that, Ramy, but I think there's another direction to take into account. It's the question of being a witness is not just what you see or what you experience. It is a question of memory. And what do we know about memory? Well, we know now, in a way that we didn't know some years ago, the memories are constructed by the brain. They are not, it's not that a person sees something in an objective way and then can recite it. What they remember about what they see is something that the brain has put together, which may take many different elements, some of which are germane, some of which are not germane. But the memory is not a neutral impression based on the senses. It's the construct of the brain to a very significant degree, which means that there are all sorts of factors that may not be relevant to the event that get factored into how the brain constructs the so-called memory. So there are a lot of reasons why even the best intentioned person, even a person who has is giving true testimony about what they saw, what they remember about what they saw is not some neutral impression through the senses, but it is really a construction of the mind. So naturally, that makes eyewitness testimony dubious. And the second witness is important because the chances of their memory being manufactured in exactly the same way that is the case with the first witness is much smaller. So the chances of there being common objective perceptions becomes much greater. One person, you have no way of knowing what they actually saw and what they didn't see. But if a second person can concur on what they saw as well, the chances are increased that what they are proposing as the event is really more likely to be accurate. But you know, what's really interesting about this, and it's not mentioned here, but as you all know, the texts from the Torah become the basis of the rabbinic position on many things. And one of the things that's very interesting about this question of testimony, especially in the capital case, is that the eyewitness has to do something more than just see what happened or experience what happened. In order for their testimony to be given credence, they have to have warned the person involved that what they're doing or what they're about to do is against the law. And it isn't enough just to say what you saw. You have to have admonished or directed the person not to do it. Now, that puts the bar unbelievably high. It's, you know, Judy's right that it is the bar in all these cases high. But what is the why do the rabbis add this notion that the eyewitness has to have warned the potential manslaughter in order for the testimony to have full weight?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I want to say three things, actually.
Okay.
One is this is against gossip. So gossip would be like you hear something third hand. And what I
Yes.
imagine is that they needed this in the Torah because before people were going by gossip and executing people if there was a rumor that someone had killed someone.
Well, the gossip is part of it, but it's also a question of how even the most scrupulous witnesses often are drawing conclusions. What they say, their testimony includes things that are conclusions that they draw, not actual observations. So, for example, in Jewish law, somebody who's giving testimony in a capital case actually has to witness the action. Let's say a person goes in a locked room and doesn't come out, whatever, and you find the person upon examination to be dead, but you didn't actually see the person who killed this person walk in and walk out of the box. That testimony doesn't stand. You actually have to.
So another thing is the incremental one that you've been talking about forever, that this is a step toward eliminating capital punishment.
Yes.
Making it more difficult. And kind of connected with that is the idea of it's the responsibility of the community. This is an act by the community, the fact that someone has to warn someone else. So it's not an individual act.
Well, at least not only an individual act.
Not only, yeah.
You have to put yourself on the line and take responsibility in a different way for your testimony. You know, you are now presenting something which makes you could make you complicit.
So I'm thinking of, in regard to what you were saying, I'm thinking of the technology that's available to us today, where you have cameras that let's say the police wear cameras.
Yeah.
And they therefore can record what actually takes place and what actually has been said. So
Yeah.
so the witness there is really the one solitary, let's say, police officer with the camera. Maybe he has a partner who's with him, maybe not. How would that be looked upon?
Well, that's a good question, because the presumption is that if you have a police officer who has a body cam, that
Mhm.
what the body cam records is objective and what am I saying? It cannot be criticized for bias.
Mhm.
Truth is, as we know, when it comes to recording events, statements, activities, the what a camera records is not unassailable, because what you see in the frame of the camera, what the sequence of the events may be, can sometimes skew the conclusion that you draw. So just having a camera doesn't eliminate the need for corroboration. Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, if there's malice aforethought, someone can make sure there's no one around when he kills the person he wants to kill. And
Yes.
I'm wondering if we're still talking about semi-accidental death, because in line 30, the English is manslayer as opposed to murderer. What does
Yes.
the actual Hebrew say?
In verse 30,
Yeah.
Kokaman Nofesh, Lefi Hidim Yiritza et Harotzeach. It refers to the Rotzeach. Now that means it means murderer, but it can also just mean more generally a killer.
Okay.
It doesn't preclude one intention or the other.
And how about 31? Is that same word used?
Let's see.
Yeah, it is used as murder. The English is different.
Yeah, Rotzeach is the term, same root. So it's killer, but it doesn't necessarily imply murderer in the way that murderer is different from killer in English.
The reason I asked the question is,
Yeah.
if we don't have malice aforethought and someone's doing something thoughtless that
Yeah.
might cause a death, a stack of stones or something, and he leans against it and it falls over and kills someone. I
Okay.
can see there where a potential witness would say, hey, be careful, someone's on the other side, and it would be easy to warn.
Yes.
But that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in terms of malice aforethought, because in the first place, you mean if the killer is thinking, there won't be any witnesses around. But even so, it would be highly dangerous to try and intervene to yourself personally.
Well, that's an interesting point. It might increase your own danger. I would say in response that the issue is the murder has not yet taken place. Let's say
Right.
somebody has raised a heavy stone that's going to crash it on somebody's head. Think of, let's say, Abraham and Isaac, right? Abraham has raised the sword and is ready to cut off Isaac's head, but he's still in the middle of the act. The act has not taken place yet. So let's say in the more general case, you see somebody picking up a stone, which could be lethal. You have a responsibility to act in a timely way to try to prevent the act from taking place, and to do so by admonishing the person, reminding the person of his or her obligations, moral and legal obligations. Now, one of the reasons that this is so important is the point that Judy made earlier. Let's say that on the basis of some circumstantial evidence, we're pretty darn sure that one particular person has killed the other person, and we may not be able to judge their intent. I mean, how do you know what somebody's thinking unless they declare something? But you may not know what their intent is, but you know that the person, the aggressor, has killed the other person. The question is, on what grounds does the community take it upon itself to act and to make a judgment about what this person, the slayer, has done or is about to do? In other words, let's say that you haven't warned that person, you haven't taken whatever reasonable action through warnings and words, so on and so forth, to try to prevent this person from acting with to commit murder or to slay somebody. Are you not yourself complicit in this act? I mean, have you not taken the steps you can take within the limits of safety and so forth? Have you not adopted a immoral position yourself by not doing what you can do to oppose or prevent the action this person is about to take? If you have not warned them, then it's hard to know exactly what the status of your testimony is. If you didn't think it was important to warn them, well, maybe there's some ulterior motive or some confusion about why you don't take the steps that you could take in order to prevent the action. To some degree, you may be either a facilitator or at least not taking on the responsibility for your fellow human being. You know, there is another text, I'll get you, Stan, I see your hand. Rabbi, I see you also. You know,
I was just thinking,
shall not stand by idly while your neighbor bleeds. As I say, you have a responsibility for the welfare, the health, the life of your neighbor, your fellow citizen. And if you don't take what actions you can take to protect that life, you are involved in the action of the Rotzeach, one who seeks to take the life of the person. Okay, so I got Stan, I got Rabbi.
okay. What I was thinking is writ large. Some are complicit, others are guilty. The Shoach, and the fact that so many people did absolutely nothing to prevent it. it seems that's the same sort of thing you're talking about, but writ
Yeah.
large to a whole community.
Well, of course, the scale is immense in comparison, but the point in some ways is even stronger on a single basis. In other words, you can't say, well, look, it would require everybody doing the right thing for my doing the right thing to count. Why should I endanger myself if all these other persons are not doing what they're supposed to do? But the argument really doesn't wash. You have a responsibility to take action within the realms of what you're capable of doing, whether you know or you don't know that others are doing the same thing. So it doesn't get you off the hook for your personal obligation if many other people are not observing their obligation. And I think it's important to remember that because, you know, when you think about sort of the classic excuses that people have made about participation in the Holocaust, they all revolve around this question that the individual doesn't have any particular responsibility. When somebody says, I was only following orders, the assumption is that everybody was doing this and I would be some kind of oddball by not following through on my moral compunctions. But that's exactly the point, that when the moral position requires you to expose yourself as a singular person who may not be in concert with the majority, you still are obligated to do it. It's not enough to say, but everybody does. You can't, that's not a good argument. All right, Remy, what did you want to say? We can't hear you, Remy.
My allergy was bothering me earlier. Yeah, you were talking about the role of the community.
Yeah.
If they were complicit in the events.
Yeah.
I have a question to the community. When they are these witnesses, won't you say if person A is volunteering information, one of the witness, and this person doesn't have a good reputation?
That's an issue. Sometimes people are known to play fast and loose with the truth, or maybe they have some particular kind of special interest that would make them, what I would say, to be suspicious when they don't need to be. All these things are possibilities, which is why you need more than one witness, because the chances of two people having the same limitation, of course, much smaller. But I want to get back to a point, I think it was Kim who made it earlier, and Judy also, in talking about making the bar higher. What is the reason, do you think? We can be, speculate here a little bit. What is the reason that the bar is made higher? Why is it that you have to have at least two witnesses, not just one? Why is it that you have warned the person in advance of their act? Now, it's not just, well, let me stop there. Why are those things important? They all make...
Well, a lot of these laws seem to be about community becoming more civilized.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
That it's a reaction against what other people had done. That they're trying to change the law and make a community work better.
And how would, let's say, warning the person who threatens to kill somebody else do that? I agree with you that it does do that.
Well, one, it might avoid the act itself.
Yes.
And it places more than one person, as I've mentioned before, as responsible for the act.
Yeah. it implies that the community in general is responsible for whether or not uh, this murderous person acts or does not act. And the community has some um, culpability in this matter. There are certain reasonable cautions that the community as a whole ought to take.
You've mentioned before that in Judaism there isn't the same concept of sin that we see other places.
Right.
And it seems because there's not individual actions, other people could have intervened.
Yes, but all of those are individuals who had an obligation to intervene. The point I think that the text is making is that even if you are not in a position uh, to entirely or unilaterally prevent this murderous act, what you can do up until some reasonable limit is incumbent upon you to do, like warning the person or taking some other kind of action that might give them pause about continuing on the pathway that they've chosen. It's not just um, to save the life of the person who is threatened. It's to also preserve the moral integrity of the community. Yeah, Stan.
Yeah, I'm going back to your question and take it a little bit different way. Life is precious, and I think they made the bar so high because if they're going to be an heir, they would rather err on the side of the possibility he may or may not have murdered this person. Let's make darn sure before we take his life. And we'd rather, to put it bluntly, let this person go to a city of refuge as opposed to taking someone who's actually innocent and putting them to death.
I think that's a very important point. And I'll give you an historic consideration that sort of makes this point. In Israel, in its entire history, only one person who was convicted of murder was himself put to death. You know who that was?
Eichmann.
Eichmann, exactly. Eichmann,
Eichmann.
only person who was executed by the state of Israel. Not that there haven't been other murderers, there have, sad to say. But in Eichmann's case, the responsibility and the obligation of the community was on such a scale that it was not possible to look at any kind of alternative punishment. One of the things that comes into play here, let's say that you see somebody threatening the life of somebody else and you are unable to prevent it. Part of the issue is whether or not your own testimony can be relied upon. If you haven't tried to do what you can to prevent the murder from taking place, then your own motivations become suspect. And especially when you consider that there are alternatives to capital punishment. You can give somebody life in prison. There are all other things that you can do instead. Now, the only thing you can't do is say that it's an equivalency. That you can't do. But you can convict somebody of murder and then take the punishment in a different direction. This is somebody from my doctor's office, but I'm going to try to shut it down. Come on, son of a gun. I'm trying to turn off the ringer, and it's not letting me do it. There we go. Okay. So
Kerry, I have a question.
Yes.
What would happen, and I'm don't think this would have been a possibility, but
Mhm.
if Eichmann was remorseful, really was remorseful, and recognized that he, you know, committed inexcusable, heinous crimes, would that have made any difference in terms of the punishment that he received?
Well, that's a really good question. And uh, I am not sure whether it would or it would not have. It depends upon, of course, uh, some very subjective uh, judgments. Is the person who takes responsibility sincere or not sincere? And how do you judge that?
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to judge what's in somebody's mind, what's in their
It's
heart.
1 o'clock.
And you may not be able to do that. I just watched an interesting movie about a week ago about the Eichmann trial, and one of the things that the fellow who was producing the Israeli television uh, uh, broadcast of the Eichmann trial uh, pointed out that it seemed to him that Eichmann had expressed no remorse at any point. But it was also true that the same person said it was very difficult to read Eichmann's face. That the things that were said in that courtroom that could not possibly have totally unaffected anybody who was a human being. But but whether that was true or not, Eichmann didn't show that there was an effect.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes very difficult to make that kind of judgment. Now, there may be sometimes when a person makes a statement, and therefore you can have a better idea of what their intention was. But that isn't always the case. We were just watching Michael Cohen last week in the aftermath of the traitorous riot at the Capitol, saying that he made certain points about the intentions of the people who were there storming the Capitol and their leadership and President Trump. But other people said, well, but you're a convicted felon. Why should we believe you? So all this becomes very slippery, which is why I think that in Jewish law, there's such a great reluctance to take the life of a person, even when the circumstantial evidence is quite strong.
Mm-hmm.
So that is hard to figure out. Okay, I see Stan's hand.
I'm going to make the assumption that the assassin who killed the Israeli prime minister back in the early 90s was put in prison for life. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Remember, this was written at the time when many of these people were nomads and that sort of thing, and they may not have had that as an option to be able to keep someone in prison for life.
Well, I think that there is some merit to that. But remember, the context of this section is we're talking about the settlement, the Israelite settlement of the land of Canaan. So their capability to keep somebody jailed might be a little bit more than you're expecting. We're talking about a nation that is in the process of settling. And so we don't know for sure exactly what resources they had but they had some. So I think that that's not the strongest argument for that reason. However, the idea that the community has to make a judgment about it is something in and of itself, which is very, very important to bear in mind. Even, well, I don't know whether it's even, somebody like Eichmann, or almost your garden variety, there is such a thing, murderer, has disrupted the community, has essentially attacked the community, and not just this individual whom they killed. Now, this latest incident at the Capitol is a very good example of that. And many people say, and I would tend to agree with them, that this was not just an attack on a building or on the Capitol Police Force, but it was meant to be an attack on the value of democracy.
Right.
And it was a step in trying to take down the value of democracy as an operative principle in our society. Now, that's not exactly murder, but it's pretty serious business, and it makes them culpable in a way that we need to bear in mind. They're culpable because crime in general is a social act. It is not just something that pertains to one individual person who commits a crime and the person who is the victim of the crime. It's something larger. It has to do also with the values of the community. And the community has an obligation to stand by those values. Now, in the case of manslaughter, it's very hard to know what people think or feel, what's in their heart. But you can make a determination fairly easily if somebody said something or didn't. It took an action to try through words or whatever means to prevent the act from taking place. That would tend to reinforce the idea that the community's values about the taking of life are in consonance with the highest moral principles. And that tends to make the community, in my view, that they have discharged in a significant way their job as a preserver of the social or theological or moral stance of the community. So having said that, the interest of the text is to make it difficult, not impossible, but difficult to condemn somebody to death. And I think it's important to bear in mind that the text does not simply do away with the possibility of capital punishment. Why? What's the difference? What difference would there be if the text simply outlawed capital punishment? Why is there? What is the reason why the text might hold on to that? Yeah, Kim.
Well, just politically, it would be going too far. They'd never be able to sell it.
Okay, there's a practical aspect.
You know, that's your incremental idea that you can only do so much. So this is a step.
Yeah, it's a step, and that is a good part of, I think, as well, the explanation. Well, but from a moral or an ethical point of view, what advantages, if any, are there to keeping capital punishment on the books? Why not just get rid of it?
Well, there's a mistaken belief that it stops people from murdering each other.
Yeah, I think you're right that it's a mistaken.
And they found, with the reading I've done is that I know one of my sisters did a project on it in school, was that it's only immediately right after the execution, and then people forget about it.
That's true. And speaking as you were earlier about the role of the mind in the creation of judgments and point of view, this is something that applies in other areas as well. You go to a movie and you're moved by this movie. It's about some guy fighting corruption or something like that, maybe Serpico or something like that. And you feel motivated to be strong and to adhere to these values, but that strength of purpose only lasts a certain amount of time, short amount of time.
Like if you drink and drive and then have a close call, you might not drink and drive the next day, but a week later,
exactly,
you might go back to.
Yeah. So the implication of a change in behavior is not nearly as strong as we might like to think. How many times have you made a resolution? I mean, I know that I have, and for a while it works, but after a little bit longer, it doesn't work so well anymore.
Like I'm not going to leave the pan on the stove, with the burner going after I burn up the pan. And then, so that lasts for a few days and then I start doing it again.
Yeah, so this question about the involvement of the community, what is the involvement of the community in dealing with crime in general and with capital punishment in particular? There is a value in the entire community seeing that it has a role that it has to discharge in these matters, that it's not simply a private matter that involves one victimizer and one victim. Remy, did you have your hand up?
The role of the community is so important. Like I believe it was Kim, it's civilization is evolving, because if the community doesn't get involved in matters of situations like we're talking about, there won't be peace in the community. And when I'm studying the Old Testament, the common theme that God speaks is about justice. Justice, justice. There is no peace without justice. So like what Kim was saying, it's so important the community is involved.
Yeah, I think it's a very important point. And I will pick up on your comment, Remy, about the importance of justice. One of the prophets says, justice, justice you shall pursue. And the rabbis ask the question, why is the word justice repeated? What's added by repeating the word justice? Why wouldn't it have been enough for the prophet to say, justice you shall pursue? And the rabbi's answer is, I think, one of the more brilliant answers that they have. Because they say, you have to be sure that what you're doing is justice. That it's not easy to determine what's just and what's not just. But if you say, I want justice, you have to be darn sure, as to the degree that it's possible for a human being to be sure of anything, that it is justice and not something else that you're pursuing, not revenge, not some kind of absolute theoretical value, whatever. It has to be really justice. It's a kind of a caution about how we act in response to criminality around us. Kim, I think I saw your hand.
Well, no, I'm just thinking that it's not a value that every society has, justice, and the same way with freedom. And it was something that I think many of us observed with our last president, is
Yeah.
that this was not a value that he had.
Well, I would agree with you.
His
And-
value was to get done what would benefit him.
Yes, or to benefit a certain social class or economic class. I
Which
think-
would benefit him.
Which would benefit him because
Yeah.
he's part of that class. But you know, the tax cut, the last tax cut is a very good example. The benefits went to a very small percentage of the population, but it was a percentage that was very important to Trump himself, not least because he's a member of that group of people who were affected. So, yeah, that was, I think, a good example of something being presented as if it were just, but in fact, not. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, since it's essentially 1:15, I've got just a procedural question. We've really only dealt with verse 30.
I know.
Start next time.
There's a lot of stuff in this section.
I
So,
know. Well, there's a lot more in the rest of the paragraph we read. Shall we reread
Yes.
that next time? Okay, I'll mark it that we started the 31, because
Yeah.
that's where it begins to talk about ransom.
Yeah, there's a lot, as I
Yeah,
said.
that's a good one, Stan. The ransom. Yeah.
It's a very good idea, Stan. I really appreciate it. And I knew starting out that we were not going to cover a lot of the stuff here. And I don't know what you guys were thinking. You probably were thinking I was just kind of blowing smoke, because not every section in this part of the Torah is as rich as this section happens to be. But this section really is a what do I say? It's a provocation. So, all right. Well, I'm
And
glad.
it will be interesting too. I mean, it's so connected with Musar, with our character.
Yes, yes. Which
In fact, everything is, I think, that we've read.
Kim, you got it. You know, these things are so inextricably bound up with each other. It's one of the things from a pedagogical point of view that makes it difficult to do a class like this without, at least on my part, feeling that I have left out tons of stuff, no matter what the section happens to be, because things link up with other things that are not necessarily, per se in the text, but they are part of the background, part of the context.
Yeah, it seems that we should be in an hour. We should be able to deal with one sentence.
You ain't seen nothing yet. You were not around, Kim, when this first started, and we were dealing with the stories in Genesis. And let me tell you, that was really slow going, because every story.
Yeah, I wish I would have been there.
Maybe one of these days we'll pick that up again. But that was exactly the problem. It was impossible to tease out things that didn't have implications in other areas. So, all right, well, we'll stop here for today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Kim, Stan. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you too, Remy, and everyone else.
My pleasure, everybody. All right.
Have a good week.
Take care.